Hey, Curious here, and I want to know one thing. What were you doing at 16? Because we've been talking about feminism and all this, and I'm wondering how if feminism isn't messing itself up. I mean, think about that for a second. My life experience has been, well, first, as a youth, I was an unsupervised teen. I was a wild child. In the 80s, I was a rocker. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know? And I seen a lot of young female independence. Maybe independence. Maybe it was just in defiance. Which is a little different than independence. It was wannabe independence. Of course, some of these people were very self-supporting. It's just, it was an immature aspect of it because it was very self-destructive because of its immaturity. But at the time, it did not seem so. Matter of fact, it was greatly appreciated. It were wild times. It were fast times, and it was good. Good and bad. You get older and you realize you didn't want that kind of thing. And this is in the 80s when I was a teen. But then, in the late 90s, in my early 30s, it was different. It seemed to me that in the age of the internet, that the teens of this decade, or that decade I should say, not this decade, were actually somewhat more mature. Well, see, I worked in a stock room, and it was hard to treat fellow co-workers who ranged from 16 to 24. Of course, they were all ages, but the majority demographic was 16 to 24. I worked in a stockroom in a department store, and lots of people came and went, and they hired cute young girls, especially with cashier jobs. And, when I was working there, it was hard to think of these 16 to 18-year-olds or 16 to 17-year-olds as children. Because some of these girls had boyfriends, lived in apartments, held down jobs, went to school, and had their whole life plan mapped out. Of course, who doesn't at that age, and who's to say it actually fulfills itself? But it seemed to me a good majority of them did. A lot of these girls had kids. So when someone says, "Oh, a 16-year-old child in pigtails," okay, I can remember when I was a youth and and how irresponsible I was. Of course, they were different scenarios. One was a working environment, and the other was debauchery in the age of decadence. So maybe in the 80s, the department store girls were a little bit more together, although frankly in the 80s I doubt it, So you gotta ask yourself, what were you doing at 16? And if you were a 16-year-old girl, is feminism really defining your life? Or are you being defeated by feminism? Or vice versa? Should you be following more traditional standards? Is empowerment becoming entitlement? And is that leading our youth away from what, paradoxically, many feminists later embrace? You ever notice that? Just something to think about. What were you doing at 16? I know a lot of girls who were doing a lot of things from 2 different times in my life. And it makes me wonder, not really question, that 16-year-olds are kids, but to question our taboos and stigmas about it. Maybe we would find a better answer if we were more realistic about the question. That's what I'm saying. Okay? So the next time you hear about, little orphan freaking Fanny running her hiney around, think about that at 16, weren't we all thinking we were adults? Some of us weren't, but they were more sheltered. Why does nature not match our society? Or our society not match nature? What do we do? Outgrow ourselves? Or has it always been this way? I wonder. No. Well, that's curious.